Hi, this is Alex, and if you love music, well, you've come to the right place because we're all about albums. So you just bought a new turntable, maybe a new phono cartridge, a new piece of stereo equipment, or maybe the big purchase, a new set of speakers. And you want to bring some friends over, maybe family members, and you want to show it off. What music do I play? What are the best albums available to show off how great my new system sounds? These are some questions that I will hopefully help you answer. So what I'm going to do today is give you my recommendations of some great sounding albums. Now, how did I make this selection? Well, basically the way I picked it is not only music I love, but also I thought, well, if I brought home a piece of equipment, how do I check it out? So I'm going to go with my memory of bringing out the great albums that I always play to challenge a new stereo product. After I give you my recommendations for great sounding albums, I hope you stick around because I'm going to give you some information on how you can decide if, while going through the bins at your local record store, is this truly going to be a great sounding album. So I'm going to start out first with classical. I'm going to have one example of a great classical album that is just amazing sound quality wise. And here it is. It's by Offenbach. This is music to a ballet called the Gaîté Parisienne. And this album is very happy sounding, and I can guarantee it's going to feel like it's alive in your room. You're going to actually see the dancers and see the musicians playing in the orchestra pit. This is truly a remarkable album. It puts a smile on your face, and I think you truly enjoy this record. Also, this is an RCA Victor Living Stereo album, and this is one of the keys. If you ever see this on the album, you know you're probably going to get a great sounding album. The next album I want to share with you is a jazz selection. This is Dave Brubeck's Out of Time. Now, if you get an original recording of this, that will sound excellent. However, there has been many recent great reproductions. You want to look for the one done by Analog Productions, and it will be pressed at the QRP plant. This album is available online through the Acoustic Sounds website. They're the ones who put out this album, and it is truly remarkable. If you want one great live sounding jazz album that will really want to get you out of your seat and moving, this is the album for you. The next album I want to share with you is a very special album to me. This is Ella and Lewis. Now, they actually recorded a follow-up album called Ella and Lewis Again. Of the two, this is the one I would recommend. Ella Fitzgerald is my favorite female singer of all time, and she has a velvety smooth voice. And here you have the harsh sounding, on edge Louis Armstrong singing in counterposition to her. This is about as live as you're going to get. You feel like you're sitting in the studio listening to these two great performers. The musical accompaniment is also great. All the songs on this album are jazz and Tin Pan Alley standards. I think you really enjoy this album. This is a very relaxing album, one of my top 20 albums of all time. Highly recommended. It's on the Verve label, and again, you can find this on the Acoustic Sounds website, and they are the ones who pressed this album. Highly, highly recommended. The next category I want to talk about is soloists. Those male and female vocalists who are truly remarkable. The music is great on all these albums I'm going to show you, and they are A1 in sound quality. The first is one of my favorite male singers, Harry Belafonte. Now, most people would tell you get the Carnegie Hall album. It is a wonderful album. It sounds great as well. It's got a lot of his hit songs, but if you truly want a special album, it's this one right here I'm holding. It probably is one of the greatest sounding male vocal albums ever recorded. I think you'll truly enjoy this. This is a special record and a little bit off the beaten path rather than just getting the Carnegie Hall album. Also, you know that it's going to be a good sounding album because it's one of the RCA Living Stereo albums. If you can get an original copy, it's going to cost you a lot, but it'll sound great. This is a reproduction, and it was done in a really well done fashion. Excellent, excellent album. Can't recommend it more highly. The next album I'm going to recommend is another singer-songwriter, someone who has just fantastic vocals as well as great music behind it. He's a little bit more contemporary. Most of you know who he is. This is Amos Lee. This is his self-titled album. This is the one I would go to if I'm just going to buy one Amos Lee album. This would be the one. It's on the Blue Note label. Excellent, excellent sounding album, and the music is wonderful. You can't go wrong with this album. This album has given me many hours of pleasure. It's a very relaxing album, and if you try to do something like reading while you have the music in the background, you're going to put your book down or magazine down because you're going to be really tuned into this album. Highly recommended. Amos Lee on the Blue Note label. And finally, although this is a jazz album, this album really is more about a female vocalist, and this is Melody Gardot. This is her second album she released. This is beautifully orchestrated. She has remarkable, remarkable vocals. Also, it's pretty cool is that she wrote a lot of the music that appears on this album. I truly recommend this album highly, if not only if you're a jazz fan, but if you like pop music and just good female vocalists. This is one of the greats. Highly recommended. Okay, so let's move on to the pop category. These albums you probably are more familiar with. The first one is one of the greatest albums recorded in the 1960s. It needs no introduction. Everyone knows this album, Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. Now, this is a stereo recording of it. You can also get the mono recording. They're both equally amazingly recorded. Brian Wilson really cared about the quality of the sound on his albums, and this album is probably the pinnacle of the Beach Boys. The harmonies are great, the music writing, lyrically, everything is beautiful on this album. One of the top 500 albums of all time. I think it might be number 2 on the Rolling Stone 500 greatest album of all time. I'm not going to argue that point. It is one of the great albums ever recorded. There are some other great Beach Boy albums, but this is the one to get. Now, this is on the Analog Productions label. They pressed it, and I think that they hit a home run with this one. Again, on the Acoustic Sounds website, the Beach Boys, either the stereo or the mono, either one is great. Pet Sounds. You can't miss. And for those of you who have seen my previous video, I am picking the greatest album I picked for the 1960s. Here it is. We all know it. We all love it. It's the iconic album cover to Abbey Road by the Beatles. Again, it doesn't say Beatles anywhere, but we all know it's the Beatles. And this album, you want to get the 50th anniversary of the album. This 50th anniversary production is actually a 3-disc set. The first disc is the original album in all its glory, especially that perfect side of an album, side 2, the medley. Love it. Can't live without it. This is one of my top 10 albums of all time. Maybe my number 1 album of all time. I'm not sure, but it's in the top 5 for sure. This reproduction was redone by George Martin's son. He was in the studio and really took a lot of care with this album. Also, as a bonus, there are 2 other discs that come with this album, which are outtakes. Some of them are quite interesting, and I think you get a really good insight into the Beatles. So the 50th anniversary release of the classic Abbey Road album. You gotta get it. Don't delay. And finally, although it's pop music, this is a crossover. This is an R&B classic, maybe the classic R&B album, and this is Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. It was in my top 20 albums of all time. And Rolling Stone in their 2020 500 Greatest Hits of All Time release, this is the #1 album. Considered by Rolling Stone greatest album of all time. It is a true masterpiece. Now, you can see that this is mobile fidelity. This is a original master recording. And what's different is if you look down here, you can see it says that this is a one-step pressing. Now, what does one-step pressing mean? Well, what they're doing is after the lacquer was produced, instead of having 2 impressions to then form a 3rd impression to get the stamper is made from the first impression of the lacquer. So you cut out a couple of steps. So that's why this is called one step. So you're going to get a true higher quality pressing. All the one steps by Mobile Fidelity are fantastic. I think they have approximately 16 titles out now. They're always releasing 3 to 4 per year. You got to go to their website. You got to pre-order them because they run out quick. I don't know how many are left. This one you may have to get on the secondary market, but it's really worth it. Even if you don't want to buy more than one of them, look through them, find one you like. It's really worth having at least one step. One step, I guess. Yeah, that's what you'd say. You want to get one step album. Pick the one you like. There's a lot of great titles. All of them sound amazing. All of them are done in 45 RPM, so make sure your turntable can play 45 RPM. Okay, let's move on to rock. I have a couple of albums to show in rock. This is one of my favorite albums. It came out in the early 1970s. It's by The Doors. Most of you know this, LA Woman. Now, this album was re-released not too long ago by Analog Productions. Again, on the Acoustic Sounds website, you can find these albums. They have the whole Doors catalog available. If you're going to buy one, maybe this one. If you like a little bit of a harder rock edge sound. All of them, however, are great. I also own, I think, all but one of their album pressings, and they're all fantastic. But maybe you want to check out LA Woman. Riders on the Storm is just incredible. The sound of the lightning storm, thunder in the distance, rolling in sounds amazing. So LA Woman by The Doors sounds amazing. You will truly impress your friends with this album. So you're saying, Alex, what about something from this millennium? All right, so in the rock category, in this millennium, I've got an album for you. It is Beck, Sea of Change. Came out, I believe, in 2002. It's on the Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs label. Truly great sounding album. If you love Morning Phase, you'll love this album. A lot of people think this is a better album than Morning Phase, and I probably agree with them. Sound quality wise, it is fantastic. This is a double album in that it is in 45 RPM. Many of the titles are available in both 45 and 33, but check it out because if your turntable doesn't support 45 RPM, make sure you buy the correct one. So Beck, Sea Change, I really recommend this album. And last but not least, the folk Americana genre, one of my favorites. So the first album I'm going to show you in that genre is Shelby Lynne, Just a Little Lovin'. It's a tribute album to Dusty Springfield. Maybe the best recorded album I own. I kid you not. This is one of the greats. Definitely one of my top 5 or 10 best recorded albums I own. The musicianship is fantastic. Now, it is sparse. It's going to be acoustic accompaniment. Some of the songs do have a little bit of an edge to them, and her singing is just phenomenal on this record. If you love Dusty Springfield, Shelby Lynne, Just a Little Lovin', can't recommend it more highly. The next album I want to share with you is a female singer who many consider one of the greatest singers of the 20th century. Unfortunately, she only recorded one album. For those of you who have seen one of my earlier videos, I've spoken about her. It's Eva Cassidy. She only had one true album, which was a live album at Blues Alley. This is the 20th anniversary release of that album, but what they did was the original album had 13 songs. This, however, contains, I believe, 33 songs, which is the entire set of music that she recorded at Blues Alley. This has 4 discs, beautifully recorded. It sounds like you're in the room with her. A phenomenal voice, and they're all classic standard tunes. You'll recognize many of the songs on this album, many from the pop and folk genre, but I think you'll really be just shocked by how great sounding this album is, and how we wish we had Eva Cassidy with us today. Who knows the great music that we would have heard from her. Okay, so far I've shown you 12 albums, but let's do one more. True baker's dozen. Here it is, album number 13. She is the queen of Americana and/or bluegrass. Here it is, Gillian Welch, great artist, fantastic singer, songs are amazing. Now, these albums were originally available on CD and on downloads. They were not available on vinyl. They went back into the studio years later and had these albums cut, beautifully done on the Americana album label. I really recommend this album if you are really into Americana. This is one of the great Americana albums. It sounds remarkable. It's as if you're sitting in the studio listening to what the recording engineer heard. So if you love Americana, this is one of the first albums I would buy. It sounds great. The music is wonderful. It is a little bit on the depressing side, but hey, you know, if you're in that kind of mood, this is the album to listen to. Okay, I hope you enjoyed those 13 selections I've made. Any of them or all of them would sound great on your system. Now, as I've promised you after my Baker's Dozen recommendations, I want to give you some information on how you can select great sounding albums when you are at the record store. First thing you need to learn are what are the great sounding record labels. Now, there are numerous. I will give you some of them, but you need to basically, I wouldn't say trial and error, but I think talking to your friends or looking online, you can quickly find out which are the truly great albums. Again, if you see the RCA Victor Living Stereo, you probably will going to get a great sounding album. Also, albums on the Verve label should sound amazing. Anything by Analog Productions, and I showed you numerous albums on Analog Productions, they are going to sound great without a doubt. Also, you want to check out Impex Records. I've also spoken about Mobile Fidelity albums. Most of them are really good sounding. A couple are not, but for the most part, they're all great sounding. If anything, they're dead silent. They use virgin vinyl. Excellent black backgrounds for sure. Usually Blue Note, which is a jazz label, but does have some artists on it, such as Amos Lee, which I showed, and also Norah Jones. Those albums are usually fantastic sounding. I'm going to tell you a couple of labels out there that are less well known, but all of the albums that they produce are great. One is ECM Records, that's the letters ECM, as well as Windham Hill. Now, Windham Hill came out in the early 80s, and it was mainly New Age artists such as George Winston. These artists' albums are also beautifully recorded and sound amazing. So if you're in that type of music you like, or you just want to relax, Windham Hill is a great label to listen to. Another thing you want to look for in albums is the album mastered from original analog tapes. I can't tell you how many times you think you're going to get analog tapes and you're getting a digital recorded album put onto vinyl. So when you're buying a re-release of an old album and you want to ensure the best sound quality of that album, make sure you're getting an album that was mastered from the original analog tapes. Believe it or not, pressing plans also make a difference in the sound quality of your album. A few things. Number one, what type of vinyl are they using? You want to make sure that the vinyl they use is top quality, especially if you're paying top dollar for an album. Why not? And also, you want to make sure that they take the time to put the hole for the spindle dead center. As I talked to you in my previous videos, if the spindle is just off an eighth or a quarter of an inch, the album isn't going to sound as spectacular as it could. So, which are the plants I would definitely look for? Well, there's two in Germany. One is Calais and the other one is Optima. In the United States, there are two that I would highly recommend. One is QRP, again the letters QRP, and that's from Analog Productions. They are located in Kansas. And the other one I would recommend is RTI, also in the United States. So those are a few of the pressing plans I would highly recommend. Well, we talked about mastering from the original analog tapes, but if you don't know what you're doing with the tapes, it's a waste of time. So, who are the mastering engineers that you really want to look for on the album? Now, there are several. I'm going to give you my top four. Number one, I would say, is Bernie Grundman. Yes, Bernie Grundman, he is maybe one of the most respected mastering engineers. Maybe the greatest of all time. It's debatable, but one of the greats. Then we move on to the two Bobs, Bob Ludwig and Bob Katz, also very talented and great mastering engineers. A great mastering engineer who recently passed on is George Marino. And for those of you looking for a more current mastering engineer, it's Emily Lazar, L-A-Z-A-R. You can look up her discography. You'll be impressed to see what she has put out. A lot of more current artists. So these are just a few of the mastering engineers. Again, talk to friends, look it up online, and by having albums and looking through your collection and seeing which albums in your collection sounds great, you know what? Read the liner notes. You're going to find out maybe some of the people I just mentioned are on your album. Now, mastering an album goes along with studios, and there are some exceptional studios that produce albums. In New York City, we have both Sterling Sound and Masterdisc. These are two of the great studios. Another one is the studio of Bernie Grundman Mastering. So without a doubt, that's one of the great ones. If we look overseas in London, there are a couple to look for. One is pretty obvious, that's Abbey Road Studio, and the other one is called The Exchange. Both of these do great mastering work. Finally, another one in the United States in Portland, Maine is Bob Ludwig Studio, and that is called Gateway Mastering. Now that is Bob Ludwig's mastering studio. So these are just a few of the studios that I would recommend. So when you look at the album and flip it over, look at the back cover, read where it was pressed, who mastered it, and all this information that will help you figure out if these are truly great sounding albums. Let's now review the previous video's unknown album. The first unknown album I showed you is the guitar in the center, and that's Mike Knopfler's 1937 guitar. And this is Brothers in Arms, Dire Straits' fifth album that came out in 1985. As you notice, this is on Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs, and this album was produced in 45 RPM, so it is a 2-disc set. This album has many hit songs on it. Obviously, the title song, Brothers in Arms, is on this album. This album sold 9 million copies in the United States alone, and sold 30 million albums worldwide. This album stayed at #1 in the United States for 9 weeks in the Billboard 200 charts. A couple interesting notes about this album. This is one of the first albums recorded on Sony's 24-track digital machine, as well as being one of the first albums released in all digital on CD. So this is a triple D recording. The reason I showed this album is, again, due to the high quality sound on this album, which was the feature of today's video. Now, one thing about this album is, although I do play it and I do enjoy this album, I play it a little bit sparingly. And why is that? Well, for those of you who are as old as I am, you may recall in the 1980s, if you're in a stereo store, this album was on the turntable all the time. This is the album that they used to show off their stereo equipment. So if it's good enough for a stereo store, probably good enough for you. Brothers in Arms is a great album, and you'll recognize most of the songs on this album as they were radio hits. The second unknown album I showed you was the back cover, and this is a cartoon painting of the Norah Jones album, Not Too Late. This album was re-released on the Analog Productions label, and it was pressed at QRP. Fantastic sounding album. If you're a Norah Jones fan, you probably know about this recording already, but if you don't, this is truly remarkable. She has, as you know, an angelic type voice, very soothing, and this album is no exception. This album was her third solo work, and the album did debut at #1, which is her third #1 debut in a row, and it ended up, I think, number 18 in the Billboard 200 at the end of the year that it came out. This album was released in 2007. Interesting note about this album, her single release, Thinking About You, on this album was one of the first, if not maybe the first, single released by a major artist for digital download that you paid for, available as an MP3. So there you have it. Bit of a historical album in some ways. And now for this video's unknown album. First unknown album. You got it? Okay. I don't think it's too hard, but you never know. Okay. This video's second unknown album. All right. Very good. As always, this is Alex with All About Albums. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. And remember, keep them spinning.